So my name is Ese Johnson. I work for Waverly Care as development manager for ethnic minority health. Basically, what I do is I manage our community engagement and HIV awareness projects with ethnic minority communities living in Scotland. I think World AIDS Day is very important, obviously, because in the general way of everyone across the world remembering all of the people who've been lost to HIV, for me it's significant because it's a time to, I guess, reflect on all of the people who've come before me, not just the people living with HIV, but everyone who's contributed to either medical advancements with HIV or supporting communities or individuals living with HIV. It's kind of like that collective. This is the time for me to remember I'm standing on the shoulders of so many people, not just, the ones I know or the ones I'm close with. So World AIDS Day for me is that remembrance opportunity. For World AIDS Day, for me personally, I started something last year, so I'll put a little post on my social media, just reminding everyone it's World AIDS Day and what it means to myself. But for that day, I'm bringing together some of our service users of African heritage. We're going to have a reflective vigil, and I like to frame it as not just the doom and gloom sad video. It's also, it's a time for us to reflect on what's happened over the year, what's gone well, and celebrate some of those successes, no matter how little they may be. If it's something as just being able to, I don't know, get into university, or something as, great as, being able to, I don't know, start a new career or something, anything at all. If you just reflect on that and praise ourselves for being able to, again, tell HIV you're not in charge, I am. But also look at some of the challenges we've experienced and say, okay, how can we work together to address this? It's all about us as community rather than individuals trying to, I guess, do our own things. And then I'll be speaking at a corporate event for bankers within the Lloyd's banking group who are, interested in learning more about HIV and how people's experiences of HIV sort of, impact on their lives, how they live their lives, stigma, and things like that. So that's the plan for World AIDS Day. There'll be another event in the evening that I'll be attending and speaking at. It's a joint event between Waverley Care and Terence Higgins Trust. Again, just bringing emphasis on the fact that communities, which is the theme of this year's World AIDS Day, communities, HIV would not, the work we've done in HIV would not be what it is without communities having come together in different ways to say what can we do to address, HIV and its effects on people's lives. So it's going to be a very busy day. I think it's relevant that we do it, and whenever I think of World Days Day, I really play on the world part because sometimes it can be seen as a national celebration, depending on what country you find yourself in. But I like to remember that it's a World AIDS Day celebration, and that takes into consideration the different experiences across the globe, the different journeys that people are on, the different levels of, I guess, medical technological advancement different countries and different regions of the world are on. I'm from Nigeria. Nigeria is in no way or shape or form near where the UK is on eliminating HIV transmissions or challenging stigma. So it's like we're still way behind. And for me, it's good to have this day for global call to action as well, but also remembering we're not just doing all of these things within our own little pockets. There's a global impact of what every person's action is. And having that kind of grounding to remember that is very, very important to me. Yeah. It's funny because I was just talking about this tomorrow. I think the priorities should be, and it's interesting, it's not about HIV in itself, it's about what influences the spread of HIV and the negative experiences people have. And that's just inequalities. It's like no one sets out in the morning understanding everything about every subject matter or everything about every medical condition. But people perpetuate stigma for different reasons, either because they believe a certain strata of community deserves to experience some things more than others, or because they believe oh, only those people, whether that be, oh, only black people, or only people who, inject drugs, only those people, live with HIV. That is all fueled by inequalities rather, that have been perpetuated about different economic, social, racial groups. And so I feel like an emphasis on reducing inequalities would mean a reduction in the spread of HIV, the stigma around HIV, but not just even HIV, around a lot of other medical conditions, as well as a lot of other, like, I guess, what I would call health and well-being situations. So for me, it's about remembering that there is something bigger than stigma sometimes. Inequalities would definitely, to me, is the leading cause of the spread of HIV over stigma. I guess the collective terminology is, perpetuating any information that is perpetuated around any sort of, I guess, condition, situation that then influences, negative sort of repercussions towards that thing. But for me, stigma is, someone choosing to identify me as something that is not the truth because of who I am, what I look like, or what I supposedly have. So for me, it would be a situation of someone saying, oh, I'm dirty because I'm living with HIV, or I am promiscuous because I'm living with HIV, or, I am not worth their time or the same, I guess, exposures and experiences as them because I'm living with HIV. So I guess all of that negative, I guess, how people treat me negatively or think about me negatively because of my HIV status would be, for me, stigma in relation to HIV. Well, for me, my HIV journey has just been 4 years now, going on 5 years. I have done some, extensive research into HIV services across, since the beginning of the epidemic, and I would say significantly there's been an increase in the knowledge, the medical knowledge, the technological advancement around both managing the virus as well as, I guess, moving towards hopefully maybe having a cure someday. There's a lot of that has happened. I think for me, one of the things that has been constantly lost within service provision is the human part. Again, talking about what I said about inequalities, if we don't remember that we're dealing with people, not just a virus, it means we're not focusing on all of the other things that influence HIV as it exhibits in a person's body. So to me, yes, technological advancements are really good. They're very, very good. But it's the thing of which do we, when does a trade-off become irrelevant? When people get medically and technologically sound, but humanly, I guess, disadvantaged, is it actually worth it, or should we be recalibrating what we think as progress? I feel like the messaging about you equals you will only get better and better. Um, Again, I feel like we've kind of reached a threshold where the information going out isn't creating as much of an impact. And that's just because, again, we're getting to a point where we're seeing in the UK mainly, or sort of thinking about the UK and Scotland, we're seeing, we are getting, I guess, lower on infection rates of people living with HIV rather. So it's kind of, we're at that point where the messaging isn't giving us as much impact as it used to. But I feel like this is kind of the point where we reprioritize what we're focusing on. So for me, get to zero, you equals you, all of the messaging, all of the campaigning that we're doing is very, very important because it does help us to get to goals and to achieve, plans that we have. But I would say, in addition to all that, what are we doing in terms of how people's lives actually are impacted by HIV? How people's lives are impacted by either living with or without HIV? I feel like we should start looking into that because if we don't, it means when we get to 2030, when we plan to have eliminated new transmissions, we're going to be left with this entire chasm of problems that have been sort of pushed under the rug because we've been trying to hit a target on the end. I'm goal oriented when I need to be, but I feel like this is one of the situations where we're being overly goal oriented and we're trying to be the first to do this and we're trying to be the first to do that, and it's, I guess I have a different motivation around targets. I come from a country where people are less motivated by targets because I guess we have so many things that we're dealing with. So targets become quite useless, to be honest, because it's like, yeah, that's fun, but what does that actually mean? Like, what does that mean in real life? What does eliminating new transmissions is good, but what does that actually mean in terms of the quality of life people experience, the experiences and understanding of HIV past eliminating transmissions? Because all of the messaging we're putting out there is very, very goal oriented at the moment. It's very much we're trying to get to this point, but it's like, yeah, getting to a point is fine and good, but first of all, what's the journey? What does that journey look like? And then after we get to that point, do we just stop living and existing and like go and die? There's a life to live afterwards. So what are we thinking about that? Are we thinking about what our actions are, what they would mean for, I guess, the future of people living with HIV or just the virus in itself? I think there's a lot of, and if you had asked me this a year ago, I would have probably said let's invest more in service development. But today I would say let's invest more in policy work, because I think policy is an area, because we work in the charity sector, we're very much inclined to only see the direct good we do in terms of working with people on the ground. But now I'm inclined more towards the policy angle, because that's the angle that influences decision making and rules and laws and resource, I guess, dispensation to different areas of healthcare. If we are doing more in that regard to identify, what are some of the rules and laws that we have in place that don't benefit, the people living with HIV or people who are living with HIV and do not even know about it. What are some of the reasons why they suffer at the hands of HIV? If we are asking those questions and we're saying, let's change that, let's change that, let's change that. Again, going back to the thing about inequalities, if we are able to address some of these things that are much more structurally sort of embedded, it will just have a piggyback effect on then eliminating some of the little things that, all of us are trying to eliminate or to do. But again, it's that thing of like, it's probably very hard to envision. So I would say for Waverly Care, we should be doing more with decision makers and policy makers to try and identify some of these bigger issues that we're not looking at, and then addressing some of those. It doesn't mean we should stop service development and delivery, because that's very much useful for people in the moment who need that support. But again, it's where do we strike the balance between doing something that is good in the moment and just keep doing that without actually changing anything on a grander scale, and striking that balance between when do we experience some temporary inconvenience for a longer term gain. So I would say we should invest more resources in that side of work, and not just in relation to direct impact on about HIV, but in relation to all of the things, because we know what a lot of the service users who come to us are facing. They face so many issues that are not specific to them. So things like housing, things like immigration issues, those things are not specific to them. They're the same things people living with the virus who do not know about their status are facing. They are the same things people who, have gone before us, people who have unfortunately lost their lives due to, HIV related or AIDS related diseases. The same things they faced. So it's like, why are we not doing all of that? It's like, why are we not thinking in that sphere? And I think that's that's where my investment would be. That's where I would put my money if it was me. Again, this is very much, situationally dependent. This stigma would exhibit in a different way depending on who you're talking to and who is relating to them. But I feel like personally, it's not overt anymore. No one walks up to me in the street and says you're HIV positive, you're dirty, or sometimes even on dating apps, no one really says. I've only had like one or two people who have specifically said, "Oh, I would not want to speak to you anymore because of your HIV status." But for me, it's very much embedded in a lot of other things now. It's embedded in getting a tattoo piercing. Like recently, I didn't even know apparently some piercing studios, they need to have an extra level of insurance. When I'm like, I'm undetectable, I'm not of any risk to you or any of your customers. What's with the extra, levels of precaution? So it's like stigma is become, for me now, is that very sort of subtle thing that is flying around us and can easily pass as they just did not know what they were saying. But in actuality, yes, they did not know what they were saying, but that's, as a result of us having rules that have excluded people living with HIV from certain parts of life. That for me is where stigma kind of, for me, where it stands at the moment. But again, that will be a different situation depending on who you're asking and what pocket of community they fall into.
A question from one of the community members is prep and testing. What are the challenges that we face now and going forward?
Yeah. Testing, prep, PEP. Yeah, we can identify so many reasons why people can access them. We can say logistical challenges, geographical isolation, social isolation, not understanding the information, not. But when we actually look at the fact that when we address all of these issues, some people will still not be able to access some of these, very, very useful prevention tools. And again, that goes back to what I was saying about inequalities. If we're not addressing the inequality, that means people cannot take 30-40 minutes off their everyday jobs to speak to a clinician about their eligibility for PrEP. If we don't address those inequalities, they would know how PrEP works on a molecular level, but they will still not take it. They will know how testing works, but they will still not go for it. So it's less about, knowledge is power. And I guess I like to go to the next step, because knowledge is knowledge to me. Understanding is power. Understanding is where everything falls in. So if people understand the benefit of these things, they would use them and they would access them regardless of what challenges, are in their way. But if someone doesn't have that understanding yet, all of these other structural barriers, once they face one of those, they will just go back. They'll go back home. They'll go back to their everyday lives. So if we address those issues, anyone who doesn't move to the understanding level of how this actually benefits them as an individual, they will still be able to access PrEP, PEP testing, because there's no barriers in their way. There's no, it's kind of an easy flow into, okay, I'll just do it now because obviously you've told me about it. Definitely, yes, there is still things that we need to do in terms of educating people about these things, but I guess the truth is that people have information now. Sometimes we can slip into this place where we think, oh God, people don't know about these things, that's why they're not using them. But yes, there's people who don't know, but again, people know about these prevention tools. The access to the prevention tools is a different level of, it's a different ball game. So yeah, if we address some of the inequalities that people face, I feel like it will just resolve itself. And one of those things that we see every day is an inequality on like just who is even eligible in the first place. Like trying to understand that barrier in the first place. And that's something that a lot of even people who work within the clinical sector in sexual health still do not understand.
That kind of brings us on nicely to the last question, which is another question sent to us by one of the community, but it ties into that in a sense, because so we've all been living in a kind of climate of austerity for the last 10 years or so. Where then should the priorities lie? And that kind of ties into something we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Again, I think priorities we should not lose sight of supporting people on the ground. And when I say on the ground, I mean on the front line, dealing with someone who is working and supporting someone who's just recently got their HIV diagnosis and do not know how to deal with it. We should not lose sight of that. But I think we should also start thinking very strategically on policy making and, breaking it down, not even looking at it as policy, but looking at it as decision making. Like, how can we enable better decisions that then influence that person who is diagnosed with HIV for the first time, realizing that, HIV is not going to be a barrier to their long-term health and well-being. it's taking the, I guess, the top down approach in this situation of going back to the things that we all cannot escape from, no matter how hard we try, which is the people in charge of us. Because we see ourselves as, it's like I was reading the book, it's like we're independent people, but only to a certain limit, only to the limits of the laws and the rules that govern the society in which we live in. And if those laws or rules don't change to enable us to, I guess, break free from one of these things we're facing on the ground level, then we're just going to keep sort of going back and back. So for me, policy making, decision making is a very good place to invest time in. Communication is something that I'm very interested in now, because it's communication past just telling people, and this goes back to knowledge and understanding for me. Telling people about HIV, PrEP, PEP, World AIDS Day, all of that, that's good. You know, that's just knowledge. People know it, but it's different from how can they translate it into their everyday lives. That's where understanding comes into play. You know, if I understand that living with HIV means taking my medication, which means, no, let's forget about other people, transmission and stuff, which just means if I take my medication, I'm able to still do the things that I've planned to do, you know, the things that I had dreamed about doing all my life. I'm able to still do that by just taking my pills once a day, you know, going for my 6-monthly checkup. If I'm able to understand all of how this one thing, you know, relates to all of the other areas of my life, then I can start making decisions that work in my favor. So it's less about the virus, it's less about other people, it's about me knowing what the information is, but then understanding how it translates into my life. And I feel like that's the level of communication we're not yet doing, in that we're focusing on just telling people stuff, which is good, but it's like, especially, we live in such an age now that it's easy to know stuff. Just go on the internet, there's millions of people giving out their opinions out there, you know. Opinions are flying around now. So now people are even desensitized to what you're saying. So they're hearing you, but they're not assimilating it until you bring the information to them in a different light. And I feel like that's the level of communication we should be focusing on. How can we help people understand HIV and its impact on them as an individual, on their everyday lives, instead of trying to just keep telling people what they already know or what they are hearing but have no, like, they can't just correlate. It's like, how does that impact me? What does that mean, you know, for my everyday 9 to 5, 8 to 10 working life, you know, how does that impact me? Those would be my 2 areas of focus at the moment.
Thank you.